down to business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your mission control specialist host, Rick. So before I get into tonight's topics, last week I did a very large segment on Afghanistan, and unfortunately, a very large event happened earlier this week and resulted in the deaths of 13 of our service members and a very large portion, a very large number. I don't even know what the total number is anymore. Of civilians were killed in a suicide bombing attack in just outside the airport in Kabul. Before I do anything tonight, as you know, I'm a military veteran myself. I have a lot of love for our soldiers, those who put themselves into harm's way. And as always on this program, I always try to give them some sort of tribute. So tonight, before I get into anything else, I do want to play taps for those people who have been killed in the suicide bombing attacks over in Kabul. So if you'll give me just a second, let me get the background up, and I will go ahead and back out for the duration of the time that taps is being played. Please take the time that taps is being played and say a prayer or two for the people who have passed on, and for the ones that they have left here, having to deal with this particular crisis. So we're going to go ahead and get that a shot. Please take the minute. Okay. And once again, that was for the service members and all the civilians who have been taken out in Kabul this past week. Obviously, our prayers and thoughts and prayers go out to all of their families and friends, people who are going to be affected by this in any way, shape, or form. It is a very sad event, and to think that, the number of people that had passed on, the 13, that actually, is the largest number since 2015 in Afghanistan. It's very, very sad. I really don't want to politicize it. I don't want to throw a whole bunch of politics into this. So, realistically, it's just very sad. And unfortunately, that is the danger that you do have when you are in the service, is that you are, you write a check up to and including your life. And, unfortunately, these people paid. Many of them, are, 20 in their 20s, low 20s. Some were like 20 years old. And so, it's kind of interesting that to segue sort of into the topic tonight in terms of age appropriate, one of the things that is asked is whether or not, the service members, you can start serving at 18. Generally speaking, if you get parental consent, you can actually join at 17, or at least you used to be able to. I don't know if that's still the case, but, um, we ask a lot. We ask a lot of these young people, and, it's sad that something like this has to occur, for us to really think about it, and focus on it. But anyway, like I said, our prayers and heartfelt thank you for the job that they are doing over there, and everything it goes out to them. It goes out to my heart goes out to them. Okay, so this topic tonight is actually a topic that I was planning on doing a few weeks ago before I took my couple-week hiatus. And realistically, it kind of brings a poignant value to today's day and age, and some of the topics that we've been discussing. I mean, we've been talking about, election responsibilities and election issues. We've been talking about, there's a lot of talk about, gun control and things like that. I mean, here in the state that I'm in Washington, there's certain, gun control laws that have to deal with age. And so I kind of thought to myself, okay, well, let's kind of explore a little bit, about the age appropriate behavior. The times, there's several times when you're growing up that you have that are incredibly important. I mean, at the age of 16, you have the opportunity to get your driver's license, at least here in this state, and you are able to drive around in a 3,000-4,000 pound car and drive. It's the first sense of freedom that you get, by heading out into the world on your own, and you get an incredible sense of freedom and opening and spreading the wings and everything else. And we spend some time getting you trained up for that. There's, laws that have to deal with going through, say, driver's education. You learn about all the laws and everything for that particular state that you're going to, that you're getting your license in, the state that you live in. And so, it's a big step forward. And one of the things that recently here, HR 1 was a election integrity bill that was being, well, I don't know about integrity, but it was definitely an election reform bill that was being put out. And HR, of course, stands for, House of Representatives. And they pretty much, they kind of were talking about it back and forth. For those of you that don't know, that was HR 1. Now, HR 1, I'm fairly certain was defeated, but I'm not 100% sure. Sorry, I didn't look at that. That isn't necessarily germane to the conversation. And thank you, Justice. I'm going to mincemeat your name here. Is it Janie or Janie? Anyway, thank you very much. I love it too. I love the cowboy hat too. So, tip of the hat to you. But one of the things that, I in particular, I was talking, or was, kind of involved with when I was younger is dealing with the voting system in HR 1. HR 1 had a lot of things that were in it. They wanted to try and change things. And one representative in particular, Ayanna Pressley, and I'm going to mincemeat her name too, but Ayanna Pressley proposed an amendment to HR 1 that was an attempt to lower the voting age to 16. And, she gave up, she got up, she gave a speech, and she kind of, to introduce her amendment. And she wanted to talk a little bit about what was her reasons as to why. So I felt, that we should give her possibility, her due, to be able to take a look and give her the opportunity to, in her speech, to provide for us her reasons behind it. So here, take a listen, and we'll discuss it here in just a second.
My amendment gets to the heart of HR 1 and recognizes the contributions that young people continue to make to our democracy. By lowering the federal voting age from 18 to 16 years of age, My amendment would enfranchise young Americans to help shape and inform the policies that will set the course for our future. From police violence to immigration reform to climate change to the future of work and minimum wage, our young people are organizing, mobilizing, and calling us to action. They are at the forefront of social movements and have more than earned inclusion in our democracy. Mr. Speaker, 16 and 17-year-olds, constituents of mine, are supporting their families. They are working not for enrichment or to build a resume, but because they have no choice. They are attending school full-time and taking care of loved ones in the midst of the COVID crisis. Young people are contributing both to the labor force and their local economies by paying taxes, and yet they are deprived of the opportunity to exercise their right to vote. Some have questioned the maturity of our youth. I don't. 16 and 17-year-olds today possess wisdom and maturity defined by today's challenges, hardships, and opportunities. They deserve and demand a government that is accountable to them, a government that values their voices and understands the depth and breadth of their lived experience. They are not a monolith, but they are nation builders, living through a global pandemic, confronting racial injustice, and rebuilding our democracy. Now is the time for us to meet the moment and enfranchise 16 and 17-year-olds.
Okay. So that pretty much, I mean, she kind of goes on. I cut it down in the interest of time, but she also goes on and she talks a little bit further about some other things. And basically what, obviously she's kind of presented an argument, and the argument is that because of the younger generation getting involved with several different things. She listed off a bunch of them, whether it was political speaking, dealing with defunding the police, which is one of her pet projects, whether it was working really hard and getting, bringing in money into the family and that type of thing. And, she made some compelling arguments. For someone who is looking at this from a purely objective standpoint, she made some compelling arguments about why we should allow for the voting age to be, dropped to 16. And one of the things that I wanted to do was that kind of got me to thinking. I mean, me growing up, I've always been able to vote from 18 on, and that is basically due to the 26th Amendment to the Constitution. That basically lowered the voting age to 18. And, but it wasn't always at that point. It wasn't always at 18. And so it kind of made me think, okay, well, if it wasn't always at 18, what was it in the past? And so I took a moment to do a search and come up with, what was out there, at the time. And let me go ahead and bring this up. So this is a PDF. I've got links in the description on my YouTube, and it'll be in the Rumble account as well, about all of the information that I get from this. So let me take a look at this and kind of, this particular one is from my home state of Washington. And it kind of comprises or compresses, I should say, the history of voting in America. So we start off in 1776, and voting is controlled by the individual state legislatures. That is still true today. All voting is controlled by the individual state legislatures, with the exception that Congress does also have a say in voting. But if we'll notice, back in 1776, it was originally written as only white men age 21 and older who own land can vote. Now, somebody might say, well, okay, so obviously let's not get into the racist thing. That's a totally different topic for another day. But I want to point out that it's only those who own land. And the reason being is because taxes are levied based on things such as income value. And back then, owning land was a form of income, and it was definitely a form of value. It still is today. So they started off, our founding fathers started off by saying anyone who is 21 and older who owned land, they're the only ones that could really vote. Just forget the whole race thing for a second. So then we started going on and eliminating racial barriers. That was in 1870 for voting. And then we had the 19th Amendment in 1920, giving the right to vote for women. We had 1924 gave Native Americans. And then we have, so we had things like naturalization in 1868 for the 14th Amendment and that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. There's not a change here of age, which again is the topic. So there's no change in age until we get to 1964 is still 21, and the Federal Civil Rights Act is passed to ensure that all men and women aged 21 and older, regardless of race, religion, education, so on and so forth, they all have the right to vote. So then the 24th Amendment got rid of poll taxes and some of the other things that have been unfair in the past for this. But you'll notice that 21 seems to be the age that they stick with all the way up until the 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971. And that lowered the voting age to 18. Now, up until that point, it had been a consistent issue that 21 seems to be the number that everybody sort of believed that you were able to do things such as vote. So I kind of thought about that and I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. So right now, 21 is the age across the United States where everybody can drink. So what about drinking? What kind of historical value or historical history have we got for drinking? And so when we deal with drinking, so this is a image. Well, let me switch this over. So this is an image of the drinking age, the minimum legal drinking age as of 1969. And I'm going to explain the colors here in just a second. But this was 2 years before the 26th Amendment was enacted. Okay. So, the red in terms of kind of the bloodish color, which is the predominant color that is shown around here, that means that every state that was outlined with that color said that the minimum drinking age was 21. The two real bright red states that you see here, I believe it's Vermont maybe not Vermont. I can't remember. My geography is horrible. But the two bright red states here, those had the drinking age of 20. Those who are kind of the purplish state, there was the dark. I'm trying to look at the colors here. So there's a kind of a mix of different blues and everything else. And they pretty much are kind of somewhere between the age of 19 and 21. There are a couple in the bright blue states, like New York and it looks like Ohio and Louisiana, that in 1969, the minimum age was 18. So, basically what had happened is in 1969, a lot of states had kind of just said, look, everybody just says that 21 is the minimum drinking age. That's it. That's all there is for the most part. And some states sort of went around it and said, yeah, well, we're going to give you a little bit of chance to drink earlier than that, and that kind of thing. So, even though the voting age was 21, up until it dropped in 1971, voting age and drinking weren't really necessarily tied to one another, which is an interesting thought in and of itself. So, oops, wait a minute. My bad. Hold on. This is a chart that I'm going to show you later. This is what happens in live radio. Okay. Live video and radio. So the next chart here that I have, or the next image that I have here, is the legal drinking age in 1975. Now, what's interesting here is that 1975 was basically the year where almost all of the states had their lowest age limit in terms of history for drinking. So what we have here is we have, again, the darker reds like Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Utah. Those guys stayed at 21. Those that were bright bright red, their minimum drinking age, which is basically, I think this is Delaware here, way over here on the East Coast. And that one is the minimum drinking age was 20. The rest of these kind of have 19, 18, 21. There actually are several states that are in this chart that had some dual drinking ages, meaning that drinking age for beer was one age, and beer and wine, was one age, and liquor was 21, so much higher for the harder stuff. And that kind of changed throughout the time, and then of course we ended up with getting the federalized legal age of 21. And the reason for this, I think, it had a lot to do with people going and jumping and trying to go to, kids going off to different states in order to start to drink. So the next thing that I kind of thought about is, all right, well, if, drinking is obviously, that's a big one. That is a big one. And for as you're growing up, so we have 16 for driving. We have 18 for when you can join the service. When you are legally an adult, you can sign a contract. You can open up your own bank accounts. You can do anything, anything on your own. You don't need parental permission anymore. And now we have 21 for the drinking age. So, how is all of this affected in terms of the long-term scenarios? Why do we even focus on some of these ages? And realistically, is it even possible, or could it even be right for someone to go and drop the voting age? Would that actually do anything for us? And this is sort of an anecdotal type thing, but when I was younger, I kind of walked around. I got interested in politics, in my mid-20s, late 20s. And I got interested in politics. And one of the things that I started doing is whenever voting would come around, election cycles would come around, I pretty much would start asking my coworkers, what do you think about this topic? What do you think about that topic? What do you think about this, initiative? What do you think about this politician? That kind of thing, in order to try and gain some sense of where things were going in terms of the thought processes for the voters. And again, this was all anecdotal. It was all young people, younger people, people under the age of 30. And what I found was that these people, most of them, they didn't even care. I mean, half the time I would start asking, like in September, end of September, early October, like, hey, what do you think about this? What kind of research have you been doing about these things? And especially when it came down to something that was really important, whether it had to deal with like schools or taxes, or, it was voting a particular person into office, that kind of thing. And, one of the things that I found was that most of the time people just don't care. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, for a long time in my own sense, there were often times that some of the things that would pop up where I just wouldn't care either. Now, mind you, this is when I was in my 20s. This is when most of the other people I was talking to were in my 20s. And most of the reason it being is because most people at that age, they feel as though, at least from my perspective, they feel as though these are not topics that they need to care about. They're focused more on things like, maybe their career, maybe getting a girlfriend, getting, maybe buying a house, depending upon what stage in life they are in. And voting actually is a very, very low end on the totem pole. And so what I found out too was that a lot of these people were going, and all they would do is they would just read the voter's pamphlet. Now, for those of you that maybe don't understand, the voter's pamphlet has a limited number of words. It has a specific amount of words that can be used within the description of whatever it is that you're voting on, whether it's a person's bio or whether it's a initiative or some sort of a tariff or new tax or whatever. And you normally would see like a pro view and an opposing view and a con. typically in those kinds of scenarios. And most people would just read that. And I mean, we're talking, I don't know, maybe 200, 250 words. A lot of these systems are so complex. A lot of these bills are so complex. I mean, here's a perfect example. These bills that normally run through Congress are, 2, 3, 4,000 pages. And they expect our senators and our congressmen to actually read through them in 2 or 3 days and vote on them. I mean, this is ridiculous. If somebody being able to get through all of that in order to intelligently vote on something is really incredible. To be able to have that functionality. I mean, even Nancy Pelosi is like, we've got to vote on it and pass it in order to find out what's in it. There's a very famous line from her on that. And, to be completely honest, that's a very cavalier way to handle one of the most important decisions that anyone could be making. That one of the most important aspects of being a United States citizen, voting, is just handled so cavalierly. And then they wonder why they're not getting enough people out at the polls. Well, again, a lot of people don't necessarily, they're not enthused. They're not excited about things. And this is where Ayanna Pressley is kind of saying, well, hey, let's open this up to younger people. Let's open this up to people who are active. And, let's be honest, we move up in the world and we start diving into, our lives, and our lives are very important. And we've got a lot of important things to do. I mean, when you're young, you can maybe have kids, you have, responsibilities that you didn't have. And so maybe it's an idea to go ahead and do that. Maybe opening it up to younger people is a decent idea. Well, I did a little investigation on that. And so I started asking myself, okay, at what point, and I'm taking kind of a medical tact here, but at what point does somebody actually have the capacity to think completely rationally about these things? And it turns out there's been several studies that have gone through this. And I found one in particular, and I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from this article. The article is down in the description. That kind of talks about the part of the brain. It's called the prefrontal cortex, I think, or the frontal cortex, one or the other. I can't remember if it's prefrontal or frontal, but anyway, the frontal cortex and its development. So let's kind of move into this article real quick here. And there we go. I'm sorry. If I try and blow it up too much, it's going to end up getting really, really nasty for those of you that are on the video side. But I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of parts here. So the question that is asked by the article is, at what age is the brain fully developed? And it's widely debated as to which age the brain is considered fully mature and developed. In the past, many experts believed that the brain may have been done developing by mid to late teens. Then along came some evidence to suggest that the development may last at least until age 20. But these days, there is actually a consensus of neuroscientists that agree that brain development likely persists until at least the mid-20s and possibly into the 30s. So if that's true, then what benefit would there be from a mental perspective? What benefit would there be in order to put one of arguably the biggest choices that some individual would make on a voting platform? Well, to continue from the article, the fact that our brains aren't developed until the mid-20s means that legal adults, those who are 18 plus, are allowed to make adult decisions without fully mature brains. Someone who is 18 may make riskier decisions than someone in their mid-20s, in part due to lack of experience, but primarily due to an underdeveloped brain. All behaviors and experiences you endure until the age of 25 have the potential to impact your developing brain. So, given this information and given what's here, I'm going to be honest with you, the idea of lowering the voting age really doesn't seem like it's that smart of an idea. So let's move on to another piece of this. And it's saying, and I'm quoting from the article, although brain development is subject to significant individual variation, most experts suggest that a brain is fully developed by age 25. For some people, brain development may complete prior to 25, while others it may end after age 25. Mid-20s or 25 is just the average given as a checkpoint for when the brain has likely become mature. So I can tell you from my own personal experience that I actually didn't grow a brain until I was 27. 27 seems to be when I woke up and I realized that I'm no longer running around playing, footsie with people, and I've got to actually buckle down and get myself going into what my life is going to be. Now, if that's the case, I certainly would not want to have been voting. And to be honest with you, I really didn't vote from the ages of 18 until about 30. And that was a mistake. That was a serious mistake, but it didn't matter to me. I wasn't involved. I didn't care. I didn't own a home. I was, in an apartment. I was barely making ends meet in some cases. So for me, voting was really low on the totem pole. And to be honest with you, I don't even think I really would have been able to grasp all of the complex concepts that can come from voting. So that being said, I personally am a little struggling a little bit with trying to lower the age to 16. It is very important, realistically, it's very important for people to understand that mentally, I don't think young people are quite there. And I'm not being mean. I'm not trying to be mean. I just think that because the development of the center of the brain, the prefrontal or the frontal cortex is not complete, then, it probably isn't a good idea to lower that age. So the question becomes, what does the prefrontal cortex do? And why is it so important to development? Well, one of the things, and this is where that chart that I gave you a sneak peek comes into play. So let me bring that up. So this is the chart, and these are basically the prefrontal cortex is the executive center of the brain. Okay. So the executive center does things like balance short-term rewards for long-term goals. It deals with impulse control and delaying gratification, which we all know teenagers have a hard time dealing with. They are looking for instant gratification. It's shifting and adjusting behavior when situations change, foreseeing and weighing possible consequences of behavior, forming long-term strategies and planning, focusing attention, considering the future and making predictions, and simultaneously considering multiple streams of information when faced with complex and challenging information. All of these things and a few more, they all kind of organizing thoughts and problem solving. All of this stuff falls within the prefrontal cortex and the executive part of the human brain. So here's what I propose. Here's what I say to Ayanna Pressley. As much as I appreciate her vigor in trying to bring younger and younger, the more, shall we say, energetic crowd into something as important as voting, I disagree with the ability of the younger people to be able to actually and functionally rationalize and reason these things out. That people, younger people, tend to react emotionally. They tend to react in ways that normal people wouldn't, because they have no sense of, what could be beyond. They're looking at just right now. And they're not thinking about the impacts of something down the road. In fact, based off of this study or several studies that this article is talking about, they don't even have the ability to grasp those concepts in terms of being able to delay their instant gratification for what's down the road, to be able to logically conclude what's going on. So while 18 is currently the age right now, and ironically, one thing that got missed by her is the fact that, wow, it's a constitutional amendment. It's number 26 of our Constitution. And for us to make a change to the Constitution, we would have to have 2/3 of the House and the Senate and 2/3 of the states to ratify in order to make that change. So even though she tried to push it through as an amendment on H.R. 1, literally based off of our government system, it wasn't going to happen anyway. But that being said, it brought up the interesting points that, is it even possible? And I think from a medical standpoint, from what medical science has been able to prove, has been able to show, that I don't think that even at 18, that somebody has the full capacity, generally speaking, of being able to make these choices, to be able to look at some complex concepts, such as what a bill is going to do, or a tax is going to do, or voting a certain person in. They're just going to fall into believing whatever that person says, because again, they're not able to be able to organize their thoughts or simultaneously consider multiple streams of information. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with a lot of these activists and the way that they're being active. I don't deny the fact that they are incredibly energetic. And you do need a certain level of that, but you also need to understand that not everything is going to boil down to an emotional response. This is all going to be rationally thought about, logic and reason. And unfortunately, your brain doesn't develop that until roughly the age of 25, according to all studies. So that brings out another question, honestly. And that question basically is, well, if the brain can't really rationalize what it's doing until the age of 25, then what about raising the drinking age from 21 to 25? And this is an interesting question because of the fact that, I got to tell you, I mean, when I turned 21, I did some pretty stupid things. I'm actually kind of surprised that I survived them. And I know that there's a lot of people who could probably say something very similar in terms of those stories. To be able to sit there and say that, hey, at the age of 21, I mean, I pretty much, I knew what I was doing. I knew where I was going. I knew what I was going to do, that kind of thing. And to be honest with you, I don't even think at the age of 25 that you really have it all figured out. You haven't even figured out life yet. So going and putting the responsibility of 21, because again, you drink and you think when you're drinking, hey, I can handle this. I can handle this alcohol. And you end up drinking and driving. And you end up getting into an accident. And maybe not hurting yourself, but maybe you hurt somebody else, even kill somebody else. So our thought processes based on those medical findings aren't even fully developed until roughly somewhere between 20 and 30. Median age of 25. So then why don't we look at advocating for raising the drinking age to 25 instead of 21? And I actually even want to go one step further than that. Right now, at the age of 18, you can go and be a part of the military. You can carry a weapon. You can be ordered to kill. You can go off to foreign countries and wage war. And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure at 18, while physically it's a much better situation than when you're a little older to be able to recover and understand. But I think maybe that there is some sort of a mental game being played, because at 18 and 19 and 20, you don't even really know what you're doing based on all medical information. And so you're less likely to resist, I would guess, when you're told to take a hill. Now, I'm not necessarily being critical of this. I'm just posing the question and saying, well, what is it that we can do if we're planning on, looking at important issues such as voting, such as drinking, such as when you can own a firearm, when you can join the military? Why don't we simply put them all into one and either take everything back to the age of 21 and just say everything is 21 now, or we change everything to the age of 25, which would be the median age of when the prefrontal cortex is actually potentially fully developed. Brings us in interesting questions. And it makes, I think, for an interesting topic of conversation that maybe, just maybe, we're not ready as humans to be able to do some of the things that we do at the ages that we're being allowed to do them. And I'm not trying to be, a jerk or anything on this, but it definitely makes you wonder, because again, our intelligence doesn't actually come totally formed until later on in life. So why are we pushing, or why would anybody push to get a young person to be able to do some things that realistically require you to have that prefrontal cortex and those logical thoughts, the rational thoughts, the rather than responding off of emotions, being able to respond off of intelligent thinking instead. And that, I'm going to tell you, is my final Whiskey Musings thought for the evening. Do me a favor, if you appreciate the messages that I give, if you appreciate what I say and the topics that I talk about, go ahead and hit subscribe either here on YouTube. Make sure you follow my Facebook page. I'm also on Gab, and I'm on Rumble as well. So if YouTube ever, gets rid of me, you can find my videos over on Rumble. And do me a favor, check out my store. It's store.whiskeymusings.online. That's store.whiskeymusings.online. Score yourself some logo gear. I have several things like sweatshirts. We're coming around into fall here in the Northern Hemisphere, so go and grab yourself a sweatshirt or a t-shirt if you prefer. I also have gaiters, which are the face coverings as well as the masks. So help support the show. Anyway, hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I hope I've given you some food for thought. We'll see you next time on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Good night, everybody.